Okay, so I would like to start now. Again, I'm going to stay in the color pane, but I would actually like to start with, it's this Terry Richardson image of the girl with sunburn. Now, if you've been in my retouching class, we work on this image, and it's basically how you want to try to remove the sunburn. And it's possible to do in Photoshop. I think it works. It's much more. It's the tool set to fix this in Capture One. I think are far superior, and it's got a tool in it that does not exist in Photoshop, and it's one of the most compelling tools to actually use. One of the reasons to be doing color correction actually in Capture One. So I want to take a look at that. And the tool that we're actually going to use for this, again, it's still in our color editor. So if you open it up, but it's the final tab over here. It's the skin tone tab. And you'll notice when you click on the skin tone tab that it starts out pretty much exactly the way the color editor, the normal advanced version looks. Again, if you look back at the advanced version, it's the big old ring, the color wheel. There's nothing been selected on it yet. It's got the little color targeting adjustment tool. Smoothness, hue, saturation, and lightness, and then your show, range here, your preview selected, all of it. I mean, that's what's going on here. If you click on the skin tone, though, it's got everything that exists. All of that exists, except it's added this thing right down here called uniformity. And I'm going to show you what uniformity does. It'll be a sort of a better way of actually showing you than it's an easier way to show basically how the tool works. Now, the beginning, the way we start out is exactly the same way we do with the advanced tab. The color correction part is actually the same. So go ahead and pick on the targeting adjustment tool here. However, in this case, what we are looking for, you want to pick a tone of skin to be your target. What we're looking for is, we're trying to say to Capture One, okay, this is the perfect skin tone. This is the ideal skin tone. And what we want to do is draw other skin tones to be closer to this one. That's what uniformity is all about. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit more in just a second. So for me, when I look at this skin tone, clearly the area that's up in here is where the sunburn is not a target area that I actually want to go after. The area, the highlights that are in her skin tone right here, no matter how appealing those are, because they're actually, they're very, they give dimension, they get all the above here, blah, blah, blah. That's still not the targeting tone that I actually want to go for here. So for me, what I would consider to be a more normal skin tone, something, great, thanks, that I could actually work with, it would not be one of these other areas right here, is going to be something right down here on the lower part of her stomach. Now, when I actually do this in Photoshop, the way we do it a couple different ways in Photoshop, but one of the ways that we do it is that we actually pick the sunburned area as a color. We could have put a color sampler point on that. Then we pick another color sample point that's down here on the bottom of her on her stomach. And we then use a curve to make the sunburned red tone the exact same color and tone as the area that's underneath. That's not quite the way the tool here works, and that's actually the difference in those is what makes it, I think, a superior tool to doing this. So what I want everybody to do is simply click on this tone down here, and you'll actually see it actually picks a color range of her skin tone down here. Again, if you turn on this view selected color part, you can see the sort of the range that we've actually got going here. I'm not really picking up a lot in this. I'm going to go ahead and extend this to its full range. So I'm going to click the drop out to extend it to its full range. And I'm still not viewing a selected color range because I'm not seeing, well, I guess some of that looks like it's being grayed out, but not a whole lot of it. Yeah, primarily it's encompassing everything in the image, which is okay. The fact that we've got all the color in here is fine. So here's how the tool, the Uniformity Tool, actually works. You can see that the area up here has got a whole lot more red in it than the area that's down here on her stomach. You see this little target spot right here? All of the rest of the colors that are sitting here are existing in this range. But this spot that I picked right here, What uniformity tries to do is it tries to take every other single color in this range and it tries to bring it down to this point to make it exactly the same. Does that make sense? So what can you tell me about this color that I picked by its position? Well, number one, it's this hue right here. Whatever this little orange slider is, the middle guy right here, that's actually the hue that it's at. If we look at the hue angle right here, it's 15 degrees. What else can you tell me about this dot?
Is it the saturation?
Yeah, well, can you tell me about the saturation of that dot? Is it highly saturated or not?
It's low saturation.
Exactly, it's low saturation because it's really close to this center point right here. So all of these colors that are sitting out here, when I use these uniformity sliders, it's going to be taking all of these colors and trying to bring them down to this point. So if I change just the hue, and I don't touch anything else, any color that's on this outside range actually will get moved to this point on the hue range. Does that make sense? So it's trying to narrow this and trying to take everybody into this range. So for instance, there's a lot more red in this part right here. So as I start to crank hue up, all the red color that's sitting in here starts to move towards this central line right here, which removes some of the red. Then when I start to change the saturation slider, it's also going to take this point right here, all the colors that are in this point, and it's going to start to pull them down into here in terms of saturation. And then finally, lightness, which you will notice we have never had before, but we actually do have lightness now. It's this slider that sits on the outside. This slider that's sitting on the outside is my lightness slider. This is my saturation slider, and then the hue point is stuck right here. So now I've got all three. I've got hue, saturation, and lightness controls. However, I'm going to do this using the uniformity slider. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab hue and start to drag it, and I'm going to crank it all the way up. And you'll notice that things certainly did change here. It pulled some of that red out. It pumped in quite a bit of yellow. You can see, and that's exactly what should be happening. It's moving areas that were in this red out here. It's pushing them back into here to actually make them closer to this color. If I grab the saturation slider, which again, a lot of this color out here is more saturated, and so it's sitting further out in our color wheel out in here, it's going to drag it down closer to this unsaturated point, so I'm going to drag it all the way up as well. And you can see it has actually pulled that color down. And then finally, the last one I'm going to hit and go all the way up with it again is lightness. And you see it does this really bizarre thing to the whole image, whatever. And the reason it's done this bizarre thing to the whole image is that it has done everything that was in this color range, that existed in this color range. It's actually tried to pull down into this area as best it can. Now, it is not so strong that it makes it exactly, it doesn't take every single image in my every single color in my image and make it exactly that. But you can see it does a very, very good job at like pulling that stuff down to actually smooth this color out. So is this making sense what uniformity is? Okay, however, uniformity is something that you want to use selectively. We don't want to use uniform in a complete hit like this, because the truth of the matter is that there was areas that were up here on her, there were areas of her arm that there was no problem with the areas on her arm. You remember that beautiful shine that we actually had on her arm? That's gone because we removed the uniformity part of it. So you don't have that. You don't have the highlights and the shadows of her arms anymore. It's also pulled out any sort of color difference that would actually be out on her here on her arms. It's made it, she looks like a mannequin, sort of. Wouldn't you guys agree? Okay, so I'm going to zero all of this out. I'm going to double click on that to zero that out, double click on that to zero it out, double click on that to zero it out. And it brings all the color, it brings all the difference back. So there is no correction that's actually happening on her right now. So instead, I'm going to do this as a layer. So I'm going to come up to layers. And again, I'm going to add a new layer to this. And I'm going to call this Remove Sunburn. And in the brush that I actually use for this, again, I'm going to click on my flyout menu right here. I'm going to click on this size to see the brush that I'm actually going to use on this guy. And it's not showing me my brush. Oh, Go ahead and hit return on that, and then click on your brush. Oh, that's interesting. I don't have anything going on here yet to give me a brush, so well, that's what my brush looks like out here. So again, to adjust your brush out here, hold down the control key and click, and you'll get the brush, and we can actually take its size down slightly. I'm going to make this a completely soft brush, but the real change that I'm going to make in here is I'm going to reduce my flow quite a bit, because what I want to do, I can tell the area that's right on the just right above the bra has got a lot more sunburn, and then higher up on her chest has got less. So I want to be able to paint this control in. So I'm going to drop my flow down, and I'm going to bring it down to like a 20. And I feel like that is actually a little bit better. So I'm going to leave my 100% opacity on here. This is how I'm going to sort of work with that, although that still feels like that's got a little too much softness. I don't feel like I've got really the control I want on this guy. So again, control, click, and I'm going to bring my hardness up to something that's more like in the 30s. So that's kind of about what I've got going there. I feel a little bit better about that part, about trying to paint with that. Okay, so then again, I'm going to go back into Color Editor. I am going to go to Skin Tone. I am going to click again on the targeting area. You don't want to click on the problem area, because if we click on this problem area, it's going to try to take all this other skin tone and make it look sunburned, which would be a way if they said, you know, she only sunburned her boobs, we need to sunburn her whole body. That would actually be a way of going about doing it. But at any rate, I'm going to click on this area to actually reduce that part. I'm going to completely expand my color range. I'm going to turn off the view selected color because pretty much everything in this image is in that color range, so I'm not really seeing anything anyway. Then I'm going to take the hue adjustment here, and I'm actually going to drag it the hue adjustment here to actually try to bring that all the way forward, the saturation all the way forward, and then the lightness all the way forward. And you'll notice that absolutely nothing happened on this image. To make sure that nothing is happening on this image, again, come up to that little arrow that points back, hold down the Option key and click, and you don't see any change that's actually happening here. And the reason that we don't have any changes happening here is because we haven't painted anything on this mask yet. So again, on my sunburn layer here, all of those controls are completely backed off now. So now I can click and say I want to draw my mask. And again, if I hover over here, just to make sure everybody's on the same page as I am, I'm holding down the Option key and clicking. Make sure that this flow is down a little bit. I'm going to actually bump it up closer to like a 20. We'll see how it goes. Flow here doesn't necessarily equate to the same thing as it does in Photoshop, but we'll see how this whole part goes. So again, if you hit your M key right now, you'll see that you have no layer mask. Hit the M key again, I would get rid of it. But now you can come in and you can actually paint on this. If you don't want to see the brush outlines of this, again, click on that drop-down menu here and say that you, this is actually going to show, again, I want to actually see the layer mask when we're drawing on here. So I'm going to only put the layer mask on when drawing, or should be painting. And then I'm going to click, and you can actually see it laid down color on that. And I'm going to click and do the other side like that, and you can see that's how fast flow is actually working on this. And then I'm going to come up here and do just a quick version of this up here. And you can see those are almost the same to me. I feel like that flow is just like way too strong. So I'm going to reset this again. So I'm going to come back down to my color balance, my color editor. I'm going to reset this. And actually, I'm going to go back up to my layers palette here, and I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to create another one. However, this one, yeah, we'll just actually create just another guy here and call it again, Remove Sunburn. But this time, I'm really going to drop the flow down on my brush. So again, I'm going to click on this flyout menu here. I'm going to take the flow, and I'm going to crank it down to like a 5 or a 6. This is pretty similar to what happens in Photoshop. Flow just takes off on you extremely fast. So we're going to keep that part off. Again, I'm going to go into my color editor. With my skin tone, click, targeting a skin tone. I'm going to target that guy right there. I'm going to completely expand the range. Again, then I'm going to take my hue all the way up, my saturation all the way up, and my lightness all the way up. We may come back in and readjust these guys once we actually do it. Go into my layers palette right here, click on the Remove Sunburn layer part, click on the drop-down menu here, and we are going to draw that mask on. So then again, I can come over here, and now you can see I'm actually able to bring these in just a little bit, so it's not quite so intense. Again, if you hit the M key, it'll show you your mask. If you hold down the Option and hit M again, it will show you your black and white mask. And you can see that the flow up here is a little bit less than the flow is actually right down here. So again, M key again to get rid of that part, M key again to get rid of that part right there. And you can see now if we turn on and off our Remove Sunburn Layer part that it's actually done a fairly good job of removing the sunburn. Now, I feel like it's still a little bit too dark here. I would like to lighten that part up a little bit more. So to do that, I'm going to add another adjustment layer. Again, if you felt like what we did was too strong, you could always use this opacity slider to bring it all the way back. But I'm going to leave the opacity slider all the way up. And then I just need to lighten this area that's up above this part right here, the part that got sunburned the most, just a little bit. So I am going to add another adjustment layer on this. I'm going to call it Lighten Skin. And say OK to that. And then in this adjustment part right here, I'm going to go ahead and paint the mask in first. So again, I'm going to paint on this area right in here. Sorry. Click on your flyout menu so that I can, and click on Display when mask is drawing. And click on this part just here a little bit. That seems pretty good to me right there. And then again, because this is a completely separate layer, I haven't done any color editing work in this one because this is starting from scratch, but it is an exposure layer issue right here, and I'm going to simply lighten it up a little bit. And you can see I probably need to paint a little bit more in there. And this is now my change here. That's maybe a little too much. So again, this is now going to be my before and after. I'm going to, again, come up to the little arrow that points backwards, hold down the Option key and click, and so this is the difference that we've actually got going. And you can see if you spent a little bit more time with this, whatever, it actually does a shockingly good job of it. Questions about this? We good? Okay. I need everybody to come up to this image right here, the girl that is on the green screen. It's the one without the color target on it. Again, if you hold down your spacebar and double click, you can actually kick back on this. Really quickly, you'll have art directors when you're shooting on green screens that actually hate looking at the green part. They want to look at anything else other than the green part, and it's relatively easy to fix that. So again, what we can do is we can come, I'm not going to do this as a layer part right here. I'm going to do it as an overall color editor. I'm going to click on the color editor. I'm going to go back to the advanced section of this. I'm going to click on my targeting adjustment tool, and I'm going to click on this green area right here. I'm going to turn on show the selected color range, and you can see the girl for the most part is gone completely black and white, which is exactly what I want. I am going to expand the range of this completely because there is no green in this girl at all. So I'm going to click on that to expand it. Excuse me, to expand it. I'm going to turn this part off, and then again, I'm going to just change the hue to something else. I'm going to say, okay, she looks so much better on this blue. Or, I know, let's do this instead. Let's just drop the saturation off and just put her on gray. So, easier for them to look at. Don't you wish that knocking out something in Photoshop was that easy? Right? For all you guys who've done compositing work, and even though, again, we're not knocking her out, we're doing this tonally, but actually zoom in and look at her hair. There's no spill. There's no, well, there's still a little bit of spill in there, but anyway, you guys get where this whole thing is going, right? Okay, so it's a little bit easier to look at, and it'll also possibly be a little less confusing for us. So the next thing that I want to actually show you guys is the other control. So again, uniformity, and it doesn't only have to be skin. You can actually use it on anything. The reason they use it on skin is because it's the most common one. People use it the most common of all. And the other thing that I should let you know about this is that some of the adjustments that we do in the uniformity part, so if we go back to the Terry Richardson one again really quickly, if you feel like stuff of this is actually too strong, you can actually come back into the remove sunburn part. We can drop open the color editor again, and in the skin tone part here, in the uniformity, we can actually pull the lightness part of this back a little bit so that it's maybe not so intense. We can still adjust these guys after the fact. We could pull back a little saturation if we felt like that was it, if we felt like the color shift wasn't quite there, if it was possibly more saturation move, but I actually think it's all three. I think it's all three of those guys to actually get that part out. But nonetheless, I just wanted you guys to realize that part. Okay, so back up now to the girl who we are actually trying to show the next tool in here. So that is the color editor and layers pretty much. The next one I want to show you that does not really exist in Photoshop is color balance. So if you click on the color balance tool, you will actually see it opens up. There are 5 tabs that run along the top. There is a master control, there's a 3-way control. If you click on that, you'll see on the 3-way control, you get a shadow, a midtone, and a highlight adjustment part. And then there's 1 control each for shadow, 1 for midtones, and 1 for highlights. We're going to start out with the master control first. So I want everybody to select on the master control. And the way this tool works is that it's more trying to balance color across your image. So this would be equivalent to pretty much using, you can think about this, if you ever shot color transparency, this would be sort of the same thing as actually adding a color filter on top of that. So does everybody have color balance up here? Not color editor, but color balance. Are we good on this? Okay, and the way color balance works is this. Again, this is the color wheel that exists right here. Right now, this color has been, it's considered to be neutral on that, and that's why the targeting adjustment tool for this is sitting right here in the middle. This is completely neutral color. There is no color bias on this at all. However, if you click and drag this thing, I'm going to start dragging this up in this direction towards these tones up in here, you can actually see that it starts to put a lot of warmth in this girl. The reason it's also bringing back our background tone is because it's now warming up that background, and that background tone now is not being controlled by our green screen, by the knockout, by the desaturation that we did of it. Does that make sense? We good on that? So to make this less confusing, because I think this is, I've just confused the hell out of everybody right now, I'm going to remove everything from this. So I'm going to click on the little go back arrow key right here to undo that. I'm going to go back to my color editor, and I'm going to click on its little go back arrow as well to bring the green back, because I don't want you guys confused by what's really going on here. And I think by having a color editor adjustment on top of it and then this color balance on top of it is possibly sowing more confusion than I need to sow, so I don't want to do that. So now I'm going to close up color editor. This has still been white balance, that we haven't changed that part of it. Again, white balance would be sitting right here. Again, if you wanted to pull off the white balance, you would click on that one as well, but I don't want to do that. So back in my color balance tool now, again, with this image selected, you can click and drag this up to the yellows, and you can see it puts like a yellow filter on everything. Everything takes this yellow bump. If you actually drag this down to the blue, you can actually see it pushes everything in a blue. So it's sort of like we're adding, again, but one of the nice things about this is that unlike a lot of the RGB color correction that we do in Photoshop, this is not affecting luminosity at all. So when we are making these things warmer or cooler, we're not making them lighter or darker, which inevitably happens when you do RGB color correction in Photoshop. Now, if you use blending modes to restrict that to only luminosity, or you change your image to LAB, then you avoid all that. But essentially, that's what's going on here. This is actually functioning in an LAB color space. And that's why it works like this. So when I change these colors, she doesn't get darker or lighter. Nothing gets darker or lighter. It just changes its color. Does that make sense? And you can take any color around the color wheel. So we can make her more cyanic, or we can make her more red. Oh, that looks like she's been developed a skin tone in Photoshop. Never mind. This goes back to Corey again when we were talking about what I thought was going on for the fashion piece that you shot for what was going on in the skin tones. This would be the easiest way in the world to actually do part of it. But there's a better way of doing the work that you're actually going to consider doing, and that's where we're going to right next in this, right? Okay, so with this, again, what ends up happening is that what we're doing here is we're not only changing the color, but we're also changing the saturation part of this. You can see I'm already saturated out here, and now the only control I get is to pull back and forth. If you want to pull this little point back into the center here. This is your saturation slider on this side over here. Simply click and pull it all the way down, and you'll see when you drop it all the way down, it recenters this back in, and this image now has no shift in it at all. Does that make sense, what's going on here? So again, it's that same as you start to get out closer here to the edges, things get more intense because you're increasing the saturation, but you're also shifting the color. We good on this? If you go to the next one over here, this is the three-way guy. And again, if you've got room on your screen, pull this color balance tool off and bring it up and actually drag to get it actually opened up much bigger here. If you've got the screen real estate, this would be the preference way to actually work on this. But in my case, you'll see that this actually causes me a problem. I can't really see this part right here. So there is a trick. I mean, it covers up too much of my image. So there's a trick to actually modifying this tool, or not really modifying the tool, but creating a tool for us to do just this work that's got a better layout. So to do that, I'm going to actually ask you to go ahead and redock this guy back into place, because what you'll see is this has all three. If I click on the shadow slider, it's just a big one that only impacts the shadows. The midtone slider only affects the midtones, and the highlight only affects the highlights. This three-way one just gives you small little icons of all three of those guys. Does that make sense? But what I would really like is something that occupied the entire space here so that I could really control these things. I had big controls that I could actually work with. So to do that, we're going to make it. So I want everybody to come up here to the very top to the Tool tab bar. Again, whatever your right mouse click is, I'm going to do mine as Control click, and we are going to actually add a Tool tab. But in this case, we're going to add a Custom Tool tab. So I'll come down to the very bottom and say Custom Tool tab. It'll ask you what the name is, and I'm going to call this Color Balance Big. And go ahead and click on my drop-down menu here to pick an icon that I would like. And I'm going to go ahead and pick the one that looks like the sunrise. And I'm going to say Add the Tool tab. And you'll see it adds a blank Tool tab right here. Then inside this space, it has no tools in it. We just added the Tool tab. In this space right here, I'm going to, again, right-click or Control-click to add a tool. And we're going to add a Color Balance tool. I'm going to come right underneath this, and I'm going to do the exact same thing again. I'm going to add a tool, and I'm going to do Color Balance Tool. And then finally down here at the bottom, I'm going to add a tool, and I'm going to do a Color Balance Tool. All three of these now are Color Balance tools. You'll see I've got three of them. Again, I don't have as much screen real estate in here as you guys hopefully have in yours, because what I would love to have is all three of these guys visible, but when I added the third one, it collapsed the top one. Because what I really wanted to go for in here is in the very top one, I was going to change it to shadows. And then in the next one down, I was going to change it to midtones. Now, I actually might get it in here. And then in the next one down, I would change it to highlights. So I only get 2 out of the 3 here. But do you guys have all 3? Yeah, you should have enough space. And the advantage of doing that is that you've now got these giant controls that the top one I would say should be your shadows, the middle one will be your midtones, and the one down here will actually be your highlights. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to do a pretty radical color shift in this. I'm going to start with the highlights alone in this, and I'm going to grab this little targeting adjustment tool, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it up here to actually warm up the highlights considerably. And you can see it puts in a lot of creamy tone in the jacket, in her skin tone, but it leaves the hair completely alone. To make sure that that's what's really going on, again, hover over that reset tool, hold down the Option key, and you can click and turn it on and off. And you can see it's kicking some of that color into the highlights that are in her hair, but it's not changing her hair color at all. Then in my case, I'm going to leave the midtones where they are. I'm going to leave those alone. Oh, what else you should know about this is you also get a lightness slider in here right now. So if you click on this slider right here, you can actually lighten your midtone, your highlights up more, or you can actually kick this down and darken them down more. I'm going to actually leave them right in the middle. All I really wanted to do was a color shift on this. if you come into the top color balance right now, the one that was for our shadows, I'm actually going to take the shadows of this guy and I'm going to drive them into a major blue. And you can actually now see that I have split toned this image. I've got a lot of blue tones that are actually sitting down here in hers, into the shadows area right down in here. Yet I've got a lot of warm highlights that are actually happening up in here. Does that make sense what's going on here? So it's just a remarkable way to split tone an image, and you can actually create color effects that look absolutely stunning when you actually look at this guy. Are we good on all of this part? Makes sense? Okay, while I am in this, one of the downsides to this is creating what we call a user preset of this. And what I mean by that is this. I'm going to reset all of these. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to reset the color balance, the top one, and then I'm going to open up and I'm going to reset the color balance bottom one. Actually, it looks like it reset everybody already for me. Okay, which is fine. I'm then going to go back to the color editor version of this where all three of them were showing here. And the reason I'm doing this is that I want to build a preset that I can use over and over and over again that is just these adjustments. So how many people in this room have any idea who Stephen Klein is? Photographer. What can you tell me about Stephen Klein's work? Anything? Specifically his color palette. Let's go out really quick. Everybody do this with me, please. Go get launch a browser. Hit Command-N to bring up a new. Do Stephen Klein. I don't know if it's VN or PH. You know, Corey? K-L-I-E-N. Or E-I-N. And then click on Images. And what you'll see is a lot of stuff that actually, this would be like a classic Stephen Klein color palette. Click on the Katy Perry image. Really completely desaturated. A lot of blue sitting down in the shadows. That would actually be a pretty typical one of his. If you come down again, you can pick up this same color palette. Sort of, this is the Madonna one again. Desaturated skin tone. A lot of blue or cyan that's actually happening in the shadows. He can actually make a color preset or a lookup table out of all of this to do this kind of work. And so to do that, again, back here in Capture One, we're going to actually sort of mimic that part of it all. So with the version that's got all three of them together in a single color balance pane, I'm going to take the shadows and I'm going to drive them all the way down to blue. I'm going to take the highlights, and actually I'm going to leave the highlights where they are. Again, I'm going to drag saturation all the way down to make sure that hasn't been changed. You can actually see I can actually pop up the skin tones in this. I'm making everything in here considerably lighter. And let's say this is just the look that I really want going here. I could do this, although I'm actually going to change this, guys. I'm going to reset this really quick because I need something that's more obvious. So again, I'm going to hold down the Option key. I'm sorry, I'm just going to hit the reset on this. Then again, I'm going to drag the shadows all the way down to blue. I'm going to take the highlights and crank them all the way up to make them really super warm. And then I'm going to create a preset of this. To do that, come up to the little menu part that's sitting right up here. Click, and you'll get a drop-down menu where you can actually save user preset. Now, this is a really important one to remember. Presets are tool specific. So the preset that we are doing right now, it's not going to remember my white balance. It's not going to remember if I've done an exposure adjustment on this. All it's going to really know is these adjustments that I've made to the color of my shadows and the color of my highlights. So I am going to do this color preset. So I need everybody to do this with me. You will actually see it gives me an option. If I'd done other possible changes in here, all of them would actually be listed in here. But since the color preset, these colors are the only thing that I've done in this layer part right here, it's the only option that I've got to actually save. And I'm going to click on Save. And I'm going to call this WH for warm highlights dash cool shadows. just so that I've got, again, I would, if you guys are going to make presets, name them, and something that you will remember 5 years from now. I'm just doing something really quick here because I would look at this 5 years from now and go, oh, this is a white something, because that's what WH means, right? So at any rate, well, here. Don't do as I say as I do. Warm, highlights, cool shadows. Now I know I'll remember that. However, look at this warning that you get down here at the bottom. And it says right down here, presets must be saved in this very specific area in this file in order to be used by Capture One. Capture One actually is willing to save this in your session so that the preset will go with the session. But you can't use it unless it's actually loaded in this area down here. So the reason Capture One defaults to that is that if I've done all this work and this is for a client and I'm handing this off to a client and I'm not using it on my machine, I want the preset to go with it. I don't want the preset to be stuck in my machine and not available to them. So that's why this thing is doing it. So if I was going to hand this off to somebody else, that would be great. But if I want to use it in my own work, this is the folder that it needs to go into. If the client wants to use it on their machine, it needs to go in this folder of their machine. Make sense? Are we good on that part? Okay, so anyway, I'm going to navigate to that folder. To get to that folder, again, you have to have your user library visible. Do you guys have yours visible? No. So I'm going to cancel out of this. I'm going to ask everybody to go to their Finder. In the Go menu, if you click on that, it'll drop down. You do not see library in this. It's one of two keys that you hit. Apple actually used to use only Option. Then for a while they changed it to the Shift key, and now it's back to the Option key. And nobody knows what key. It's either the Option or the Shift key. If you click on Shift on my computer, it shows the library. On yours, it could be Option. But it's Option on yours. So on yours, go ahead and click so that you can see the library and come down and select it. Once it's selected, grab the library folder icon, this little guy right here, and drag it onto your favorites panel. This will then make it available to you inside of Capture One in your Save dialog boxes. So has everybody got their library in their favorites? Okay, then go back into Capture One. Again, click on that drop-down menu to Save User Preset. We are just going to save the color balance. I'm going to say Save to this one, and I'm going to call it Warm Highlights. Cool Shadows. And now you'll see your library is sitting right here in your favorites. Click on Library, go to Application Support, go down to Capture One, and then go into Presets 60. And then finally, go down to color, or not down to, but go to color balance. And we're going to put it in here and go ahead and click Save. So this is now saved this preset. And to see what that actually means, come up to the image that's right above it. And we can actually load this preset. So with this image sitting right here above it, again, click on this drop-down menu. And you'll see that in your drop-down menu right here, you have got warm highlights and cool shadows. And you can click on it, and it will apply that preset to this image. All the work that was done here is actually then applied to this guy. Does that make sense? Are we good on this part? While we're on the topic, are there any questions about this? Say what? Look at the very bottom of the window. You will always get that message. It tells you exactly the folder it needs to go in. So that is the branch. So it's Library to Application Support to Capture One to Presets 60 to Color Balance. Good? If you'll scroll down to actually see what this can look like on a very interesting image, scroll down. This was actually a tear sheet that Austin if you guys know Austenberg, actually was using last year. Go ahead and apply your preset to this one as well. So again, with this visible, come up to the drop-down menu, come down here, and again, add your user preset to that. And how many of you guys have ever seen color grading like this in, I don't know, like 100,000 editorial fashion magazines? You see it all the fucking time. Make sense? Okay, and it's just that simple. So again, this is a color lookup table. The other thing that you should know about this, and I want to show you this part really quickly, I'm going to go back to the image that we had up here at the top. Let's go back to the one that actually has got the color card in it. Again, I'm going to reset this, so I'm in the color balance part. I'm going to click on this to remove the color, to remove that color preset. This image has actually now been color balanced, and I want everybody to look at their white balance tool. If you click on the white balance tool in it to open it up, in the white balance tool, you can see that when we actually did our white balance on this image, so again, I'm going to click on white balance. I'm going to click on the, again, the gray patch that's sitting right here. You can see that I get a Kelvin reading of 5,427 degrees Kelvin. This is not the color of the image. What this is the correction of the image. It had to apply this color temperature to make this image neutral. But this is not the color temperature of this image. Does that make sense? If we go to, we need a color, another color card really quick. Go to the one for Heather really fast. I want to make sure that I don't have anything on Heather that is actually, that I haven't made any changes at all. So to do that, again, right click on Heather, come down to New Variant. It creates a new variant for you. You can then actually click on the original one and delete it. The new variant will become your primary variant again. Double click and come in, and then simply color balance again on the gray patch. And now I know that the only thing that I've done to this image is to actually color balance it. But look at its color temperature reading. It's 4,710 degrees. That's 800 degrees Kelvin difference between both of those images, yet both of them are color neutral. So how could you come up with something that allowed you to do just a little bit of warming on both? You can't do it in the white balance tool setting. You can't come in here and actually drag this up 300 points and say, okay, that's what I'm going to do now. That's going to be my correction, and use that on anything but the lighting situation that's in this capture set. Does that make sense? Because it doesn't equate. Because what I'd be doing is if I make a user style out of this, so again, let me go back to where it was. If I actually crank this up so it just hits 5,000, and I make a preset out of this at 5,000, and then I use that preset on this image, in this image, it'll actually make the image cooler, because again, it's going to change this down to 5,000. Look what happens to the image. It's going to actually make it colder. So in the one case, the 5,000 degree change made it warmer. In another case, it's making it cooler. I don't want that. I want a preset that will warm everybody the same. Does that make sense? So you can't use color balance to do that. So again, I'm going to color neutralize this one. Heather is already color neutralized here. If you want something that will warm everybody, again, it is color balance, but it's the master color balance. So again, come into your color editor right here. We need to come open up color balance here. Click on the master file here. We can warm this image up. That put a lot of warmth into this. I can make a preset of that. So I'm going to say, again, save user preset. And I'm going to call this, it's going to be just for color balance again. And I'm going to call this warming. Warming the whole image. And again, it's going to say, you need to put it in this folder. And I'm going to say, okay, library, application support, capture 1, presets 60, color balance, and save. And now when I come up to the other image, the image of Heather right here, then I can apply this preset. Again, warming image. And that will put on the same degree warmth. So again, I could neutralize both images. But does that make sense when we talk about presets? The thing that you don't want to do, you do not want to actually be adding, again, you don't want to be doing that with a white balance tool. So are we good on this whole part? All right, I want to show you one last possible preset in here, and this came back in the beginning. I want everybody to go back to the camera tab. And in the camera tab, I want you to go to the next capture adjustment part. And you remember we talked about the next capture adjustment part. What it used to be that you could do in this is that you could actually, it used to be in here that they would actually have, in the older versions of Capture One, they had a place in here to actually add copyright information. They don't have that anymore. They've now got this thing that just says metadata right here and a drop-down menu. And you can see in the drop-down menu here that in defaults here basically will do nothing. You can actually put a whole bunch of metadata in one of the images, and then you can copy it to the next. You can actually do all sorts of things here, but this is usually not the way you want to introduce metadata, and especially in the older versions, because the problem with that is there was no way to add more than your copyright and basically your name. That was it. If you wanted to add any other information, that was not available to you. Does that make sense? So we're going to change that, and to change that, I'm going to show you how to do it. So this is, again, it's another great trick. Most people don't know this, but you show this to a photographer the first time, they will bow down and they will love you forever. So at any rate, to do this, come up to your top menu. The tool tab bar that's up at the top. Hold down. You need to right-click your mouse, however you want to right-click. Again, mine is Control-click to do mine. I'm going to add another tool tab on this. And actually, my metadata tool tab is already up here, so it's right here. It's the one that, it's the circle that's got the eye. I usually don't have this on mine. I usually have to add it on mine, but this one's already existing right up here. Now, we're going to do this on the header image right here, so it doesn't matter. You simply need to do it on one image to go ahead and actually make this metadata tool tab style that we're going to actually use. So I'm going to come down to the metadata tool part that's actually here. Again, if it's at the bottom of your screen and you want to see a little bit more real estate, you can click and drag this and bring it up to the very top. And then you've actually got, you'll have a little bit more room to go with. I'm going to collapse these other guys just so that I can see a little bit more of this. I can still scroll down, don't worry. I've got all this room that I can actually do in here. By default, it includes the things that are already built into this. So, for instance, the file name, the image size, this is all based on the sensor. This is all based on the camera that it actually is doing this in. You can see that this is a Phase 1 P30 plus camera back. What we care about is this part down here. So in the creator part down here, I want you guys to do this with me, and you can do this yourselves. Use the same values that I'm putting in because this is my image. So I created this image, so it would be Verser Engelhard. Come down, we could put in the job title, put President, P-R-E-S-I-D-E-N-T, Engelhard Studio. Come down, I'm going to say leave address out. In city, we can put Chicago in. In state, we can put in Illinois. In postal code, I'm going to leave blank. Country, we can put in USA. In phones, you can put in 917-520-7604. That's my phone number. Email, verser123 at gmail.com. Website, www.verser.net. And then you can continue to go down through all of this other stuff. You can add all of these other things that actually exist in here. But I'm going to leave this as just my stuff right here. Oh, we need a copyright in here. Where the hell can I find copyright? I don't see. Where's copyright notice? I still don't see it.
Copyright notice? That one?
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Copyright notice. So under copyright notice, again, if you hold down the Option key and hit the letter G, it puts in your copyright symbol, and then it would be Verser, Engelhard, 2019. All right, then I'm going to come up to the top of this in again, the little 3 list things that comes down. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to save this as a user preset. And under the user preset, it's going to say, okay, these are all the options. Do you want to save these things? And I'm going to say, you know, I don't really want them to know the city and the state that I'm in. So I'm going to uncheck city and I'm going to uncheck state. I'm not going to actually use those, even though they're sitting in this copyright, in this metadata for this one file. I don't want to put it in anything else. I'm going to scroll down. It doesn't show me anything else that's going on in here. So this is what I do want put in. And I'm going to go ahead and say save that. A window will come out and I'm going to call this Verser copyright. 2019, and again, go back to that same place. It'll tell you where this actually needs to be saved. So again, it's in that same uset, in that 60s preset folder, but in the metadata folder. So again, library, application support, camera raw, presets 60, metadata, and I'm going to save it in there. So now what I can do is on my next image down, if I want to, I can actually save this as a I load this as a preset. So I'm going to click on my drop-down menu, and under presets, you will see one of the user presets that I've got right here is my copyright information 2019. And you would simply put it in there, and it will actually add all of that information for you. If you want to do this in batch, you can actually do it in batch. You can select all of these images. So I'm just going to select the top 5 that are all mine. You can actually add it as batch here again. That'll put it on everybody. Now everybody's got that user data. But the real strength of this guy is if you come over here to your camera, to the camera icon, and under Styles, click on your drop-down menu and come down to User Presets, and you will see that all of the user presets that I've made are available to us. So you'll see that under Color Balance, this is where I had in those warm highlights, cool shadows. You could add those parts to it here. But I'm actually going to do the metadata one right here. And again, it's this copyright 2019. When I do that, now every single capture, remember this is next capture. This is not all the files you've done, but every single next capture is going to be tagged with all of that copyright information, my website, my phone number, my, what else was in there? That was it, basically all that was in there. Does that make sense what's going on here, guys? Are we good on this part? Okay. All right. I need everybody to jump out of their, go back into their Finder really quick, and I need you to click on the application folder, and I need you to see if you have a program on these computers called Chrono Sync. Do you guys have that? Say what? Yes? Well, I have it too, and I don't see mine, so hang on. Oh, God. So this goes back, no, the whole dyslexic part and then being 9 o'clock at night and, you know, and I've actually been drinking all day. No, just kidding. So, Chrono Sync. We need to, I'm going to show you guys actually how to use Chrono Sync. So on your computers right now, I think I can do this just folder to folder. What I want you to do for me is, let's do this.
If we don't have it, should we just watch?
Yeah, if you don't have it, just watch. So who doesn't have it? Oh, like none of you have it. Okay, wait, so Kate, you got it on that? Oh, okay, so none of you guys have it. Okay, they were supposed to have it on these, but they don't. They maybe have them on the computers that are actually at the in the digital lab. So here's the deal about Chrono Sync, and I'm just going to throw this one out to you. We need to have a conversation tonight about backing up data, safety, migration, integrity, validation, all of those things. We need to have that conversation. So how many people in this room right now, just by show of hands, religiously back up your work? Oh, hold your hand up high if you do that. Yeah, religiously. Okay, here's the thing. Do you have any image in your existence right now that you really care about that you don't have a backup of?
Not in the past month or so.
Any image in your life that you care about that you don't have a backup of? Probably. Then that means you don't care about that image. And it's just that simple. So when we say backup, for those of you who are talking about backup, I'm going to get back to Chrono Sync in just a second, but we need to, we're gonna take a bit of a detour first. What does backup really mean? So for those of you who do occasionally back up, what does that really mean to you? What do you do? I'm sorry, what? Okay, so you take a hard drive, you attach it to your computer, and you make a copy of your image files, right? And so you've got a hard drive that's in your computer, and you've got a hard drive that's backed up, that's got a copy of it, and that's your insurance, right? So that if the computer in the hard drive in your computer crashes, whatever, you've got all your images on that backup hard drive, right? And that's great. What happens when somebody breaks in your house and steals your computer and your hard drive?
You have another hard drive?
Well, that's not what she said. What happens when your house burns down? What happens while your house is burning down? Oh, yeah, I know. I say this to everybody. I actually had a studio that had a fire in it. And so my studio was on the first floor. It was only a two-story building. My studio was on the first floor. And there was a garage that was attached to there was a garage behind this. It was a sort of industrial building. And there was a garage behind it. And there was a walkway from the garage roof to the second floor. So it was sort of like, it gave the people on the second floor sort of like two patios. They had the one that was right outside their house, and then they could walk out this like long like sidewalk to the rooftop of their garage, and they had this whole other little deck out there as well, right? The person who owned it lived on that top floor, and he was a slum landlord. And people hated him. So somebody set his garage on fire, torched it. So the garage is like completely engulfed in flames, and it travels right up that little walkway part and sets his house on fire. So the fire department comes. This is like, there was a friend of mine who was shooting in my studio. It was like midnight. The fire department comes, and I don't know if any of you guys know anything about fires, but when they go to put out a fire, what they do is they don't really treat what they do is they see the edge of the fire. They don't go after where it started. They go after the edge of it. They go after where it's moving to. And they start just soaking that. And so that was like the front of this guy's house, right? And then they slowly work their way back to where it began and to put the whole fire out, right? So they're trying to mitigate the damage. So they start from the outside and they work their way in, right? And they just put the hoses on this thing and they let it go. So the hoses have gone on this thing for like a couple of hours. It's not like 2 o'clock in the morning, and they leave. They didn't get it all out. Fire lights up again. So immediately spreads up across the thing again, whatever. So they come back. It's now like 4 o'clock in the morning, and they put the hoses on it again. Hoses are on for another couple of hours. It's now 6 o'clock, whatever. They leave. It catches again. It's now like 8 o'clock. They come back. They put the hoses on it, and they let those hoses stay on this thing for like 4 or 5 hours. I mean, they just soak it. I get there at like 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I walk into my studio, and it is pouring down rain in my studio. Imagine walking in a space like this, and it's not just dripping. It's a thunderstorm. That's what's happening, right? And I've got, my film archives are there, sets are there, furniture's there, Seamless is there. I lived in the studio at the same time. I had been staying at my girlfriend's house, whatever. It's just an absolute shit show. And then finally, when it all, 3 days later, when it's finally dried out, everything is full of mold. Everything is full of mildew. I mean, it's a gut job. So I always say to somebody, if you really hate somebody, do not shoot them dead. Burn their house down. It's a lot worse. Okay, so with that in mind, we need to start this conversation. We're going to go through quite a bit. I'm going to point out the pitfalls to you guys, and I'm going to point out the things that we actually need to do to avoid those pitfalls. There is a lot of this information that actually is on our website. Sorry, guys, I'm not sure what section this part is in because I adjust all of this. There it is. Okay, so remind me, last week when we were ending up in the last part of Capture One, we did talk about how to do Cmyk conversions in Capture One, didn't we? Right? Didn't we build a recipe that would process out a Cmyk file? We did that part, right? If you want to do it in Photoshop, because I don't think we looked at this in Photoshop, did we? Okay, so in Photoshop, so start in Capture One with me really quickly, and let's do the same thing. I don't care what image we grab. Let's grab an image, though, that actually does have a color card in it. I'm going to, again, zero this completely out by clicking on the top arrow, the circle back arrow at the top, which will remove everything from it. I'm going to click and drag that into Photoshop. Would it matter if I had done that or not? Hard to say, all right? So at any rate, I'm going to zoom into this. Oh, actually, guys, let's not use this image because this, again, is from my face. So hit cancel out of that. We'll just do the one of Elizabeth. So scroll down. Yeah, this image right here. Simply drag that into Capture One. Oh, here, before you do that, if you've done that, close up what you brought into Capture One. The question that I've got is, does it matter what color correction that I do here? Will it translate into Capture One? I mean, into Camera Raw? No, it will not. To prove that to you, click on the red patch here to make her really, really cyanic. And then drag that guy into Photoshop. And you'll see when it comes in, it really tries to guess at what the real true color correction is. So again, I'm going to zoom into here a little bit. I'm going to click on the white balance adjustment tool. I'm going to click on that to go ahead and color balance it. I'm going to open this as an object. Although it won't really matter because when I actually do a mode change on this, it's probably going to have to change this. It won't allow it to stay color adjustment here. So if you've been in my retouching classes, we've talked about this. If you haven't been in them, you need to make sure that this, and this is just something that you should have set on your own computers anyway. If you click on your edit menu to the drop-down menu here, unfortunately this is a preference that they don't have in preferences. They've got it here under color settings. And when color settings actually opens up, the thing that I recommend that everybody have is unfortunately not the default that ships with Photoshop. So tell me, what is the setting preset that you guys actually have? It's what?
We have North America General Purpose.
Yeah. Is there anything wrong with that? Tell me, what is your RGB color space? Wait, I gotta see this. Yeah, that's what most of them are. So no, you don't want to do any of these guys. Hit cancel. Go with the edit. Okay. Yeah, the color settings. Yours is actually right. So wait, who had what over here? ICC what?
Well, it is Srgb.
It's Srgb, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what? How do we feel about Srgb? Is there a problem with that? Yeah, there's a big problem with that, right? I think. I need everybody to do this with me really quickly, because again, I don't know how much color we've done, but I doubt we've actually gotten to this. Have we looked at color sync utility in this class? I know we've done it in retouching, but have we done it with you guys? And we actually looked at the relative difference between Adobe RGB and sRGB? Yeah. Yeah. So you guys are all familiar with that? What's the difference in sRGB and Adobe RGB?
Way less color data.
it's a smaller space. Okay, so we don't need to visit that. So again, yours is set up by default to start editing all these machines here, and it's the default that actually Adobe ships with, is Srgb is your editing space. It gets worse. When it comes down here to color management, and it says for RGB color management policy, what does your thing say? Here, I'm going to just put it all up here so you guys can look it on mine. It says preserve, wait, oh, that part's actually changed. No, that part's been changed. So these are all preserved, but what about these things right down here? The profile mismatching, missing profiles, or ask when pasting. All of these have been turned off. All the warnings of this have been turned off. So it's the wrong color space, it's too small, and any warnings that you would have to that effect have all been shut off. So you want to change this from North American General Pre-Purpose to North American Pre-Press 2. This will now set it up the way it should be set up, and you will see that Adobe RGB is our working color space, that all of these profile mismatch warnings have been turned on. And so what this means is that if you get, for instance, if you take a file off of the internet, most files on the internet, color image files on the internet, if they do have a profile in them, they will be in an sRGB color space. So they will actually get brought in as an sRGB color space. However, when this happens, if you've got it set up like this, when you bring that sRGB file into Photoshop, it will actually know that, and it'll bring up a warning dialog box and say, you've got a profile mismatch here, and it will give you options in terms of what to do. So we're going to look at those options in just a second. So, but the other thing that is important about this is this CMY color space right here, and you can see that it's set to US Web Coded Swap version 2. That is one of many options. If you click on this drop-down menu, you will see that there's a whole range of options to go here, and I'm going to need you guys to whip out a piece of paper right now and write this down, because the setting that you use here is the setting that it is actually going to use when it creates a CMYK file here. This doesn't only apply to Adobe Photoshop, but this also applies to Capture One, because in Capture One you can use any of these profiles that I'm going to talk to you about right now in Capture One to build your color recipe for your CMYK conversion there as well. So in this drop-down menu, I'm just going to read these off to you really quickly. If we come up to the top, this gray call, this one right here, coded gray call 2006. This is for a sheet-fed offset press. And what that is it's a CMYK press. It's what you would actually use to do magazines. It would be a perfect example for this. So a Chicago magazine or Vogue magazine, whatever, would use is a sheet-fed offset press. If you go down to swap, and it's not going to be in here. It's not loaded in here, so I don't have it on my computer. You guys may not have it on your... No, I take that back. No, it's not this guy either. I'm missing one of these profiles. So I'm just going to throw this out to you guys right here. There's one that's called simply Swap 2006. That would be used for web presses. So a web press is a much cheaper version of a CMYK press. It's more like what they would probably use in the digital center here to run off posters. It's not something that's, it does have CMYK inks, it does have some color fidelity, but it's not really high end. Again, it's it would be a lower quality lower quality work. However, this web-coded swap grade 3 down here, I do have that. So this would also be web press, but it would be a high-end web press. So they're using a much better quality paper for this web press, and the press itself is a higher quality. Ironically, the grade 5 version of this is actually shittier paper quality. So the long and the story short of this part is that if you are going to do the CMYK versions, you would want to know what press you were actually doing the CMYK version for. You would need to get that information from the printer, and then you would plug this thing in and do the conversion yourself. You would do it ultimately yourself. There's one other in here that I'm looking for, and I'm not gonna find it. So, but the one that you would use, generally speaking, if you cannot find out who, would be, again, this US web-coded swap version 2. So that's the one that is actually picked by default in this North American prepress 2. And go ahead and say OK to this. So if we wanted to now convert Elizabeth to do this, you would, again, to do this, you would come up to the image menu, down to mode, down to Cmyk color, and you'll see that it'll say here, changing modes can affect the appearance of smart objects. Do you want to rasterize this or not? I'm going to go ahead and rasterize the image. I'm going to say it's all done, and then you get this warning message, and it's going to say, you're about to convert to US web-coded version 2 of this profile. This may not be what you intended. To choose a different profile, click Edit Profile. It's just meaning you would go back in here to that color settings and you would change the output CMYK to the profile that you wanted to use. Does that make sense? But in our case, we're going to go ahead and say OK to this, and we're going to save it to that. And we're going to say all right to that part. And then I'm going to simply do a undo and a redo, and an undo and a redo. Do you guys notice a whole lot of change in this? There's not much shift in this, right? Zoom in really quickly. Yeah, it doesn't seem to change much. A lot of images will change a huge amount, but anyway, that's how we actually would turn this. And you can see if you look over in your channels right now that you indeed have a CMYK. So here's the trick about doing this. So I'm just going to throw this part out. Again, there's PDFs that are on our website. If you take a look at our website, just to show you where all of this is, these are PDFs that you should be downloading and saving and referring to. But if you look at our assistant version of this, and I think this is all in week number, looks either 11 or 12. In week 11, resources, this is where the Chrono Sync guide is, which is something we're going to get to in just a second. I'm looking 10 resources. This is where a lot of this is. Okay, CMYK workflow is in here. Data migration, data validation. We're going to talk about all of this stuff here tonight. And we're doing pretty good because this isn't like really long. This is more ideas. But guys, you should download all these PDFs. You should keep this stuff available to yourself so you don't necessarily have to write this part down. But the things that you need to consider in doing CMYK version, and this part is really, 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 really extremely critical for you guys, is you need to determine who's going to do the Cmyk conversion, because if you are a photographer or you're a digital tech and you're responsible for doing the Cmyk versions, you need to know how to do it. However, if you're not responsible for it, you need to establish who is responsible for it, because all of this is going to fall on you. If all of a sudden a client gets a file that is done incorrectly or prepped incorrectly, believe me, the first person they're going to blame is the digital tech. So you need to establish, and you actually want it to be you to do the conversion, because then you'll know that it's actually been done correctly. So it's not a bad thing, but anyway, it just would be something that I would actually check on. Again, your best option if you have to do this is you've got to get information from the printer about the profile they want to have it converted to, because otherwise you're just guessing, and you do not want to do that. Make sense? Okay. File delivery. I want to talk about file delivery right now because there are some liabilities in this that you guys are going to have as digital tech. So in file delivery, again, it's going to be the readout that we've got in here. The thing that you've got to take into consideration, depending on what it is you are doing, you need to pretty much make your work unchangeable. So if you are doing only raw files, it's not a bad thing. If you're delivering raw files, it's not a bad thing, because nobody can fuck up a raw file. All they can do is throw it away. They can't change it. They can process it, but they can't change the raw file. So that's a safe thing to do, and it's the easiest thing for a digital tech to do. However, if they are expecting you to process files and do color correction and do all of that kind of stuff, that becomes more libelous because they can say, oh, that person didn't do it correctly. That person did it wrong. Well, there are very few ways that you can assure that that happens. So let's say, for instance, I'm the client. You process a file for me. I get it, and I go in there and I change it. You give me a layered Photoshop file. You've done some color correction work on it, a little bit of retouching, whatever. I go in and I throw all those layers away, flatten the file, save it, and say, well, this is the file they gave me. Well, who's right? So one of the possible assurances that you've got, if you're nervous about this, is to only do file delivery on read-only media. So what's read-only media? It's a DVD that's been set to burn once, read only, that cannot be changed. If you burn that file in on that and deliver in that media, it cannot be changed. Again, all of these things can be a pain in the ass. Do I do all of these things? No. I'm just trying to point out, if you're nervous about this, if you're nervous about a client being a little sketchy here, whatever, there are things that you can do to cover yourself, and so that was one that I wanted to throw out. If you are delivering files, you need to make sure that, number one, you only want to give flattened files, whether they're corrected or not. You also want them at final resolution, so if you're giving a file to a client who is only looking for position only, you're giving them small res files, all of that kind of stuff. You want to check and make sure. So res is going to be critical on this. Size and resolution, again, depending on if you were doing something for a screen or for website or something else like that. While we are talking about that, very few people know how to do this part, and I want to show you guys this part because this comes up all the time, and it's going to come up for you guys as well. How many people in here know how to prep a file to go on a website? You all have websites and you don't know how to prep a file to put it up on there? Okay, well, we're going to do that right now then. So back into Photoshop. I'm going to go back in space here. So when we actually just opened this guy up where we opened it as a smart object, however, you don't want to keep this as a smart object. So let's say we've done a ton of work on this file. Everything is, it looks great. We've done all the compositing, all the retouching, everything in here. You would then want to, well, actually, let's just do something to here. Let's let's make it a black and white. So let's go ahead and put a black and white adjustment layer on the top. So the image is now black and white. This is perfect. This is exactly what we wanted to do. And now it comes time for you to send this to put it up on a website. Okay, so to do that, your first move here is to flatten the file. So come up to this drop-down menu, come down, and you flatten the file. Now, if this is a master file for somebody, you're not going to save this over the master file. You would save that version of it as your master file. What I'm going for now is the web version of it. Okay? And you'll see it's not going to overwrite this file. It will actually go back and leave it here. So to do this, you want to come up to the file. First off, we're going to come up to the image menu and you've got to resize it. So up under image size, you need to find out in this drop-down menu you'll actually see here, I've got options here, and the options that you always want to deal with are in pixels. You want to find out what the pixel width is of something that you are actually saving to. Again, it would be this pixel size for the website. So I'm going to go to my website really quick. I did this once and my website didn't work. No, that's not what I want. Okay, so for instance, what size is this image right here? You don't really know. Actually, all of you guys go to my website. Let's do this all together again so that you can remember how this whole thing works. Now, Flash is something that people have a website that is built in Flash, basically the thing about Flash is it's really a movie of your pictures. It's not really individual pictures themselves. But most people have gotten away from Flash now because Flash is not supported on any Apple products that are portable. So you can't use Flash on an iPhone, you can't use Flash on an iPad. You can use it on their computers, but you can't use it on that. So Flash has been pretty much orphaned by most people. So people are getting away from that. If somebody offers to do your website in Flash, you need to find somebody else. But in the case of this image right here, let's say I want to replace this image or I want to add an image to my website. If you hold, again, it's a right-click move. If you hold a move like this to click on this, you can actually copy your image, which is what you want to do. So you simply want to copy, do a right click to copy, hover over this image and just do a copy image. And then go back into Photoshop. You've gotten all the information that you actually need to do. I'm going to cancel out of my image size here really quickly, just 1 second. And then I'm going to change something because, again, I don't like the way this works in the new version of Photoshop. I want you to come up to Photoshop, down to Preferences, down to Interface. I think is where it is. Nope, it's going to be under General. Yeah, yes.
We don't have that menu when we right click. It's like a shorter.
Open a new tab.
Oh.
So I'm guessing this is what Elizabeth is saying on here. When you control click down, what'll say, did you get an open a new tab?
Yeah.
This guy right here. And at this stage of the game, you don't need to copy it because it's giving us the information that we need that's right up here. It's 569 by 750 pixels. But you can still, again, right-click on this. Now can you copy the image? Okay, so copy the image. Back into Photoshop. Again, go up to the Photoshop, down to Preferences, to Interface. Sorry, to General. And you want to check this Use Legacy New Document Interface. This is the old new document interface that existed, and the reason it's just so much better than the new one. The new one is new and improved and awful. So anyway, I'm going to click on the checkbox there and say OK, and then simply hit Command N or go up to the File menu and you come down to New, and it will open up. And in this drop-down menu right here, it will tell you. It'll give you an option to do your clipboard, which is what you want to do, because the image that you just copied is sitting on your clipboard, and you can see right here what this image is sized as in pixels. And you can see that the height of that website image is 750 pixels by 569 pixels. Does that make sense? We good on that? All right, so I'm going to hit cancel out of here. I'm going to go into the image of Elizabeth now, and I'm going to come up to Image, down to Image Size, and I'm going to again use my drop-down menu here to go to Pixels, and in the height, I'm going to type in 750. If you can't type in pixels here, if you've got this resolution unchecked right here, or resample unchecked, you will not be able to pick pixels here. You've got to have this resample turned on. And then again, I don't want you to change the width. I simply want you to put in the height as 750 and then say OK. This image will then be rescaled to, didn't resize it, hang on. Pixels. 750, and say OK to that. This thing has now been sized for that website. Again, if you double click on the eyeglass now, it'll show you what the image looks at 100%. And this would actually be the same as that other image would look. To prove that to you, come back up, do Command New again, and actually go ahead and say OK to a new untitled version that is the size of your website. And then do Command V to paste. And you will get this warning. This was the other thing that I was telling you about. I copied that image off of my computer. Now it's saying that the source is display. The source is actually Srgb, but the two could be argued to be one and the same. So I'm actually going to go ahead and say OK to this to convert this to Adobe Rgb. And I'll say OK to that, and you can see these images are the same height. They're not the same width. I didn't change the width of this guy, but it is the same height. OK, so I'm going to cancel that up and get rid of that. I don't need it. To save this now for web, you want to come up to the File menu. There's a million ways of doing this, but I'm telling you, this is the best way to do it. Come up to this, come down to Export, and you want to come down here to Save for Web Legacy. This was something that Photoshop tried to get rid of, and the Photoshop community was up in arms about this. They almost burned Adobe down to the ground. And so Adobe buried it in here, and this is where it is. So again, this is the place that you want to get to. When you do that, a dialog box will actually open up, hopefully. Well, that's not looking good. So you'll see that I had to force quit Photoshop, and it actually opened up again, and it opened up with that image actually in place again. That's because Photoshop has an autosave function in it now to take care of crashes like this. It doesn't happen all the time. You can actually set the increments of when that does happen, and it's, I think... It's right here, automatically save recovery information, and mine is set to every 10 minutes. You can change this so that, again, if you run into a crash like this, at least you won't lose everything. And this is actually still sized correctly. So in my image size, I do have, in terms of pixels here, it is 750 tall, so that is correct. So again, up to the File menu, down to Export, down to Save for Web, Legacy. And when this opens up, you have tabs that sit up at the top. You have an original tab, an optimized tab, a 2-up tab, and a 4-up tab. I want you to always select the 4-up tab. When you select the 4-up tab, it will show you your original, usually on one side, and then if you look at the other sides that are actually over here, if you click it, you will get this drop-down menu over here that will give you options. In terms of the options that you want to select this drop-down menu. You want to pick JPEG for this. In this drop-down menu right here where it shows you'll have, this is actually the compression of JPEG that's going to use. If you start it off at maximum, it will only do maximum for the image that's surrounded here in blue. The other two images will show different compressions, so you'll actually see as I click on this one over here, it's actually set to medium, and this one over here is set to low. You can change all of these independently of one another. They don't, if you change one, it doesn't have any impact on the other. But what you care about is this part right here. How big is that file going to be? And with mine set to maximum right here, you can see it's going to take it from a 1 megabyte file and turn it into a 164K file, which is an extremely small file, and it will be great for a website and it'll load really quickly. But if this thing all of a sudden said it's going to be 4 megabytes on here, that's a very big file. It will not load quickly, and you would actually want to drop this down. So again, you'll see if I drop this down to very high. So you use this control guy right here to control the size of the file. Typically, the file that I'm looking for, file size, is you want something under 500K. That would be, it'll load really fast on anything. It'll load fast on a phone. Anything over that, you'd want to bring this down. And all of these numbers are doing is changing this right here. You do want to leave this checked as an optimized file. You also want to embed the color profile. These are critical right here. And then this is the holy grail right here. See this where it says convert to sRgb? You've got to have that checked. So this is the setup that you want to use. So I know I've got a small file here. I'm going to set it back to maximum. I've got this part is now set to optimize, embed my color profile, convert it to sRgb. You don't need to worry about the preview. If you do have copyright information in your metadata, it will also embed that in it. And then you simply hit save. It's going to ask you where you want to save this, and you will actually notice. I'm going to put this in my TOS folder. I'm going to say OK to that. This has now been corrected for my TOS folder, but you'll notice this file here is not that file. This is the original master file. This hasn't been changed, and it hasn't been resaved. The saved version of my file is here in my TOS folder. And again, I get that same warning that comes up because I've converted this to sRgb. Every website in the world is using sRgb as their color space now, so that's the one that you want to use. Even though we're doing all of our editing in a much larger Adobe Photoshop RGB color space, sRgb is the standard for on-site websites. So you can see that this worked exactly the way I wanted it to work. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. That's what the file looks like. And you'll also notice right here, it's a 172K file. It'll load like that. That's how you prep files for web. Okay, guys, we are going to leave it at there and pick this up next week. So we will get to backing up, data migration, all that kind of stuff next week, because I need to get these guys turned off and back to those guys on time. Are there any questions about this so far? All right, well then give me 2 seconds. Let me just cover this part just to make sure that we know. So again, in your file delivery, size and resolution you care about. Color mode you care about. We just looked at that. Is it an sRgb file? Is it a Cmyk file? The format that you put it in. Is it JPEG? Is it TIFF? Is it Photoshop? Or is it a PDF? A JPEG can actually have an enormous amount of compression in it. We've already seen that. TIFF can actually have an enormous amount of compression in it, but still carry everything that a Photoshop file does. A PDF can actually maintain everything in a Photoshop file, including layers. So again, all formats that you could possibly actually keep that in. Most people will deliver in 8-bit. Well, actually, this is too deep. We'll get into delivering in 8-bit next week, and I'll see you guys then.